If you're like me, having played through the Soulsborne games and falling in love with them, they would have left a heavy impact on how we perceive other games. Not only games within a similar genre, but games in general. I've personally fallen out of love with games that aren't Dark Souls or Bloodborne, and this is probably at its core because of downright fanboyism. But that's a good thing. In today's modern society, it's great that we as a consumer can still get excited about the things we love. But I want to tap into my own mind and figure out why this is the case for me and others. It's a common thing to hear amongst the community that if you play these games, this will occur. But why is that? Well, I feel for one, it's amongst very few games that doesn't treat us like we're idiots. It has faith in us as a player base. We've been plagued by today's modern games by map markers, hints, holding the player's hands and the sorts. Is that okay? Well, yeah, but it's no longer the experience I'm looking for after going through these From Software titles. Dark Souls and Bloodborne are actual video games. They're not walking simulators or cinematic experiences. We play Dark Souls because we want to play a video game. But any game can do that. Make a few design decisions in early development and you've got yourself at its centre what Dark Souls is all about. So why is Dark Souls and Bloodborne different then? What sets it apart from the rest and why should we celebrate these games? Well, I believe it's the world. I've never been in my life so passionate about something, and I hope I'm getting that across to you as well. We're put into a land and we meet characters, and if we take the time out ourselves we start to care about them, somewhat understand them. We're not being told to care about them, we can choose to not even talk to them, but we do it anyway, because we're intrigued, and to maybe fill in the gaps in the story that's being told. Lordran, Dranlake, Lothric are all wonderfully crafted. This is the world we've been given, and we're free to explore it. With such attention to detail, the never-ending span of the lore, some people have made actual careers explaining the lore in Dark Souls. And that in itself is a testament to how interesting and fascinating this can be, and how curious we are. They've made people want to know more without telling them. It pains my heart when I hear someone say that there's no story in these games. There's no story because you didn't look for it. It wasn't handed to you, and unfortunately, that's the mindset of most modern day gamers. They want to sit down and have the experience play out in front of them. They don't go looking for it. But that's the beauty and mystery of Dark Souls. They leave a little breadcrumb trail, with huge gaps in it, and expect you to fill in the rest, to use your imagination, again not treating us like we're idiots. Who knew something so simple as the director not being able to speak or read English well enough could spawn this huge positive factor that goes into his work? Now I must reiterate, when I say I've fallen out of love with video games, I still, love them. I just kind of view them differently when playing through them now. One example is I always play on the hardest difficulty whenever I pick up a new game, which I feel is a trait I've picked up from Dark Souls. Is Dark Souls the hardest game in the world? Certainly not. But it's taught me to feel this sense of accomplishment after passing through an area I was struggling with, because I didn't have a choice. I come from an FPS background, and I think that's important to know what kind of gamer you were before you ventured into Dark Souls. I was a big Halo 3 player, and obviously Halo isn't really difficult when you're referring to the single player. Although I think one of my greatest gaming regrets is not getting to rank 50 in multiplayer. I got to 49 and just gave up. If only I could go back. Anyway, now I've been playing a lot of Fallout 4 recently on the hardest difficulty, which is survival, and I got to a certain point and I was at it for about 2 hours. It was the Mechanist fight, for those who know what I'm referring to. I had very little ammo and nothing to heal with. After 50 or so attempts, I thought, sod this, and lowered the difficulty and beat it first try, and it made me feel quite cheap and almost disappointed in myself. But why? I have nothing to prove to anyone, but I can't do that in a Souls game. And this harkens back to the difficulty which I've talked about in a previous video in more detail. I have no choice but to go forward, otherwise I'm not going to beat the game. It's like an elegant face-off between you, the player, and the game. It almost feels as though it doesn't want you to beat it. But that's where amazing work at From Software comes into play. There's a fine balance between being difficult and being unreasonable. And I think From Software have created a formula that works insanely well and what other games in this genre aspire to be like. Now, in a few of my videos, I've bashed on Dark Souls 3 a fair bit and it almost gives off the impression I dislike the game. Now, first off, I love the game, and I'm only really criticising elements of the game I disagree with, but the Dark Souls formula is still there. Whether it's been altered and tweaked, we come back and we endure in misery and frustration, but at the end, we look back and think, I wish I could experience that again. Because the first playthrough of a Dark Souls game, and you know you have to do it blind, is the best experience you'll have in the game, and you have to cherish it because there's no other way to get that feeling back. The feeling of discovery, the awe as you walk into or discover new areas. I'm also a huge medieval fantasy fan, which I think factors into why I love these games so much. The knights in armour slaying undead just gets me hyped just thinking about it. But that's personal preference, and I wasn't really a fan until Dark Souls. Since I was a Halo player like I mentioned, I was more into sci-fi, and still am to some degree. Moving again onto more personal stuff, I remember I queued up for an hour to play Bloodborne nearly a year before it was released, down in London. And I wasn't really a fan of buying gaming merchandise. I always thought it was a little odd. Well, that was before I fell in love with Dark Souls. Since this relationship, I've got countless shirts and the odd picture and figure. It's almost like an abusive relationship. It'll beat me into a pulp and I'll still buy it things. Maybe that wasn't the best comparison, but my point still stands. Talking about fanboyism, it's great that we are so loving of this franchise, but there's a difference, a pretty big difference between fanboyism and elitism. And I think, unfortunately, Dark Souls is one of the worst contenders for that. We all love the series, but because we love it so much, we will not let any criticism near it, and I think that's unhealthy. Dark Souls is by no means perfect, and we should let others have their opinion on the game, whether that be negative or positive. I'm a strong believer that it's a good thing to let others have their voice, and we as the fans can listen to it, as it not only opens our minds, being able to see things from different people's perspective, but I feel it makes us more intelligent. We learn these social traits. We're a community after all, and we're all here because of one singular reason, and that's the admiration for these games. I just wanted to end here and say thank you to the people who have pledged to my Patreon. It's a surreal feeling, and with your help I'm able to spend time working on better quality content rather than spewing out video after video in my one-man army operation. You've heard me say it before, but from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Take care everyone, be good to one another, and don't you dare go hollow.